we will move back to 9C, or 9B, to consider a motion to approve the community survey results.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mayor and members of the council, you're very well aware that we're in the midst of updating our comprehensive plan. The mayor just mentioned it. And also, according to your strategic plan, we wanted to complete a community report card so we could look at data and measurements to help us understand kind of where Red Wing is at. And the other piece that is part of your strategic plan this year was the completion of a community survey, a residential survey. And so the city contracted with Morris Leatherman Company to complete a 121 question telephone survey. And if you recall too, many of those questions were formulated from the Red Wing 2040 process, along with kind of asking some repeat questions from previous years about city services and some other areas like that. So happy to introduce Peter Leatherman. He's been before the City Council in the past to present this latest survey that's completed, the key findings from it, and answer any questions that you may have about it. Mr. Leatherman?
Can I talk from here?
You can speak for either one.
Either one? Excellent. All right, it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. Just to refresh everybody's memory on what we undertook for this city, we talked with 400 randomly selected residents across the community. A 400 sample provides us the margin of error plus or minus 5% in 95 out of 100 cases. This is the statistical caveat. The phone calls were completed between September 6th and the 20th, so this is fairly fresh data. Field work was wrapped up less than a month ago. The average time a respondent took on the phone with us was 25 minutes. As Brian mentioned, it was a longer survey. I saw some people when they said 120 questions. Actually, for a city survey, that's right about average. Currently, for my community up in Champlin, we're at 190 questions right now. I've been trying to get them to pare it back. But it is a resident's opportunity to play city council member for an evening. So if you make it convenient for them, which we do by setting up appointments, it's not you have to answer the survey now or never. It's when would it be convenient if now is not convenient. We can get the refusal rate down to less than 5%. And I mentioned the 25-minute average time. We did have 7%, 26 people stay on the phone with us for over an hour. That was by their own choice. Many of them I would probably classify as the town historians. And so there was a lot of follow-up with a lot of their comments that they had. And everybody wants to know about cell phones. Cell phones are included in the sample. This time around in the city, it came in at 34% were cell phone only households. 15% were landline only, and then the remainder had a combination of both landline and cell phone at this point in time. So with that, and also like Brian mentioned, we had a lot of new questions into this survey, but there are some common questions. We can go back historically. We have a data point in 2005 and 2013, the last time I was out here. It seems like I just pulled into the parking lot. It was 4 years ago. But one common question we have is the overall quality of life rating in the city. We have 35% rated as excellent, 58% good. So a combined favorable rating of 93%. Unfavorable, only 7% said only fair, nobody said poor this time around. Now, most people in the state of Minnesota are rational and live in cities that they at least think have a good quality of life, or they'll look for another place to live. So the 93% is a very good rating, obviously, but what differentiates cities is the excellent rating. And you can see we jumped in 2005 from 05 to 13 by 9 points to 38% excellent. A little bit of a dip, 35% now saying excellent, but it's not statistically significantly different. The average across the state of Minnesota right now is 21% excellent rating. So you're over 50%, almost 2 times as high on the amount of people rating the quality of life here as excellent. Now, what do they value? What do they like most about living in the community? And you can see there are some pretty statistically significant changes on this chart. The small town feel has kind of dropped a little bit, down 7 points from the 2005. The river and the natural beauty has almost been cut in half, from 27% to 16%. And people have gone into kind of a more suburban response in that the city's close to things that are important to them, such as their family and friends, doubling from 7 to 14%. Close to the job, doubling 6 to 12%. But still, you do have the small town feel, the river, friendly people, and the housing and neighborhoods leading the list. But a little bit of a decrease in the small town feel ambiance of the community coming in is what people value the most. Now, if we ask them what they like most communities want us to follow up and find out what the most serious issue facing the community is. You can see what leads the list, and for the sake of the comparisons, I've tried to put a bright green color to pop out the 2017 responses. What leads the list still is taxes, 16%. 1 in 6 residents pointing to it, very stable over the course of 12 years. And this is also atypical to what we're finding across the state of Minnesota since last summer. It seems that with last election cycle, not the presidential portion of it, but the legislative portion of it, as the state of Minnesota talked about the surplus, a discussion on property taxes, people had a growing concern about property taxes across the state. Right now, that average is about 20 to 25%. So you're very stable for 12 years ago, which is unusual, but we haven't seen the growth in the property tax hostility that we've seen other places. But it still does lead the list at 16%. What else hits double digits? Growth jumped from 2 to 14% this time around, and then and that's a reflection that there's too much growth. Then on the opposite side of it is kind of a desire for more growth, and we're going to see this a little bit when we go into more depth. We classify those the lack of businesses or the lack of jobs coming in. If you combine that, about 23%, about a quarter of the community pointing to that. And then crime and drugs did double from 5 to 11%. We're going to look at that in a little more detail too, and the perception that crime is increasing in the community. But when we're looking at an open-ended question like this, we consider anytime you get over 25% in a community that it really is a serious issue. 1 in 4 people coalescing around the same response. You don't have that. You have some issues that we would flag as concerns in the community, but nothing that would be a major concern. And if we go down to the second from the bottom, the nothing category, I think when I was here in 2013, that 35% was right at the top across the state of Minnesota. Those folks are boosters. They see no problems in the community. They're different than unsure. Unsure folks tell us, I'm sure there's something, I just can't think of it right now. The nothing people say there are no problems here. This community is pretty much perfect. Now that obviously reflects back to the 35% that said excellent previously, but still that's more than 2 times the norm across the state right now. That average is about 10%. So you still have 1 in 4 people in the city of Red Wing saying that there are no problems facing the community, and we would classify them as boosters.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So for the most serious issue, just as an example, were these offered choices like the frac sand mining, or were these offered by the people you're interviewing?
They're offered by. It's an open-ended.
I see, okay.
So you can tell. And then what we do is just collapse them down into categories. We have a scattered category of people that, you know, my neighbor's barking dog.
Right.
They're not going to go into the bigger groups. Anything over 2% gets its own category. And you can see how, you know, the history of it in 2013, we had 2 issues that came onto this chart with the golf course issue and fracking
That's
and
why I
sand
asked,
mining.
because it seemed very
Exactly.
specific. Okay.
Yep. And I would say also with 28 charts, please feel free to ask a question when the chart is up there if you have any questions. It's hard to go back as you get through and say, what about back on chart 3? The city is a place to raise children. The darker gold color is the result for 2017. And that's 85% rate the city as an excellent place or good place to raise children now. It's down a little bit of an uptick in the only fair category, that's at 11%. And when we look back at the data, those folks were most likely to say that crime was the most serious concern facing the community at this point in time. But still, you have 85% rating the city very highly, a very strong result. What about as a place to retire? 91%. Very stable, down 2 points from 2013. But overall, you have 8 to 9 out of 10 residents saying that the city of Red Wing meets people on both ends of the life cycle spectrum, shall we say, those younger families and those senior citizens as they're looking for a place to settle in retirement. Would they recommend Red Wing to others? Absolutely. 8 out of 10 said yes, they would. 13% said no, they wouldn't, and 7% were unsure. That no was kind of a mix between a lack of jobs, lack of businesses concern, and a crime concern in there. But still, you do have 8 out of 10 saying that they would recommend the city, about 7 points higher than we typically see across the state on this question. The sense of community is phenomenal in this city. 97% rated it either excellent or good. 3% only fair or poor. Now there is a difference if I'm doing the survey in the city of Roseville to an exurban area to get out to Red Wing or smaller towns across the state of Minnesota. The norm in the metro area on this is 75%, excellent or good sense of community. For non-metro portions of the state of Minnesota, it's about 82 or 83%. 97% is the highest that we have in our database in the last 3 years on the overall sense of community. Whatever has been done here has really built a sense of community among residents. Thus, if that sense of community has been built, do people feel accepted, valued, and welcomed? Absolutely. 97% indicated yes, only 2% said no. Community characteristics. This is absolutely.
On that 2%, do you have any demographic information on it?
I can provide that in the crosstabs, absolutely. It's going to be a very small, I think the N is 7 out of the 400, so it'd be 7 people. You can look at that. The community characteristics. This is set up as a stoplight. Red means stop. Too much of this sort of characteristic. Green, bring more into the community, and yellow, you have about the right amount. On all of the characteristics we tested, you had at least 50% indicate that the city has about the right amount. Now, if we look to the left-hand side, what do residents think that you perhaps have too many or too much of? You don't have anything that hits 30%, and that's kind of the threshold that we look for on there's a reflexive sentiment in the community that there's too much of one thing. Trails and bikeways lead the list at 19%. Parks and open spaces 15%, and apartments at 14%. Very low, especially on apartments. The norm on that one, most folks in Minnesota don't really love apartments that much in their community. So the norm on that is about 32%, much lower in the city of Red Wing. Now, on the green side, what are residents looking for more of? You only have one that hits over 30%, and it actually goes to 42%, and that's entertainment opportunities in the community. And then we drop down to the 27% level, looking at dining opportunities, affordable health care services at 25%, and then apartments and housing people can afford at 23 and 22%. But really the takeaway here is you really are meeting in the minds of residents, doing a fairly good job in meeting the developments across the community. One way also to look at this chart is to take the red and the green and create a plus minus. So if you look at housing people can afford, you have a plus 14 14% more people would like more than less of it, and do the same way to give you that priority. And it also follows then also on the negative side, the trails and bikeways, it comes out at a -11 because you do have 8% in the community who would want more.
Could you explain the job training programs on that one? I don't understand that.
The 25%, now you have a fair amount, I should mention also, people can say that they don't know or refuse, which is why the bar doesn't add to 100%. But you could look at it that way with that you have minus 22% saying, or I'm sorry, plus 22 saying they want more. And that relates back to having more jobs and businesses in the community, that economic buy-in. Because people talked about, especially the folks that were on the phone with our phoners for longer periods of time, really talked about if you bring in the type of jobs that a family of four can live on, then that's going to create and bring the growth in the community that we want. And then what follows from that is the secondary growth opportunities, the entertainment, the dining, those sorts of aspects.
It looks to me with some of these areas like perception and reality are kind of a ways apart. For instance, mental health services, about right 64 and 15. Well, I know I certainly don't hear anything that would lead me to believe that we have nearly enough mental health services. And that's a little disconcerting how much difference there can be between perception and what's really occurring.
That is a very fair statement when you're talking about opinions of people across the state. That was a lesson I learned 25 years ago when I started working for the company. Perception sometimes doesn't match up with reality. And people's behavior oftentimes is you get a better indication of what behavior will be based on their perceptions versus what reality is. But perceptions come from experience. You do see, like on the mental health services, affordable child care, preschool programs, job training programs, a much higher level of uncertainty of folks saying, I don't have enough information in order to make that decision. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I noticed that kind of later in the demographic breakout, you had 70% homeowners to 30% renters.
Yeah.
And it seems, I mean, I guess it appears to me that that would drive a lot of answers to these perceptions too, because owning your own home may give you different outlooks, but
Oh, absolutely.
it seems also demographically probably pretty close to accurate.
Yes, and looking at those key demographics, we not only use them so that we can, when we write a report, look at those differences, because there'll be attitudinal differences, but also as a check with the census. And those key, households containing children, home ownership, age, households with seniors and everything, on all of those key demographic factors, we were within that margin of error. In fact, I think we were within 2 points on all of those key demographics.
Okay, thank you.
Any other? Population growth. This is kind of the tension I mentioned earlier when we looked at the most serious issue. And we told residents what the city's population was in 2000 and what it was in 2010. And then we asked, does that seem too slow, about right, too fat, or too fast? And you can see 2/3 of residents say it's about the right amount. But if people are going to tip one way or the other, you do by a 2-to-1 factor have more people saying that it's too slow versus too fast. And that's kind of what played out also in the most serious issue chart, where we had the 2-to-1 margin of lack of businesses, lack of jobs versus the too much growth aspect too. Now, should the city take policies to encourage greater population growth? 66% said yes. 28% said they opposed. On this one, when we look at policy questions, we always tell our clients, focus on those of the categories of intensity, those that feel strongly about it one way or the other. And you have about a 2-to-1 margin again. Strong support at 25%, strong opposition at 13% in favor of the city taking policies that encourage greater population growth. But you still do have 56% that are softly supporting or opposing at this time. Arts and culture, 47% of households indicated that they or a member of their household had participated in an arts or cultural event in the city. Very high participation rate. We asked them what sort of events. It was a long list of opportunities that they had. But then the follow-up question is, do they think that the city should provide more arts and cultural experiences for residents? Absolutely. 71% indicated that they agreed with that statement. 17% disagreed. And if you look at the intensity, only 22% of people feel strongly one way or the other, but it's 3-1 in favor of the city supporting more of those arts and cultural experiences.
So can you tell with that if people support more experiences, whether they support more taxes going towards that?
That wasn't the question. The question was simple. I'll read the question specifically because that's, do you agree or disagree the city should support efforts to make more arts and cultural experiences available to residents?
I think that could be a fooler.
Well, in a sense, you can see that it is important to people. And when we work with a lot of school districts with referendums. And we always tell them when you test something in concept versus grounded in property tax increases, it oftentimes changes people's opinions. We do know, though, also that the agreement, especially when you have such high participation, it will depend on the amount of money being used. But we can't correlate it at this point. Yes.
Have you asked this question of other communities or something like it?
We've asked household participation, too many, too much, what are they looking for? But straight out a question like this, no. City service ratings. The next two charts are very busy. There's a lot of information on them. I decided to put up the 2005, 13, and 17 results, and we'll just look at it as a whole. What I've done is combine the excellent and good into the blue, the favorable, positive rating. The red is the negative, only fair or poor. They don't add to 100 because some people said they didn't have enough information to give a rating this time around. What we're hoping to see is a sea of blue instead of a red riptide. On all the key services that we tested, extraordinarily high this time around. Police, 94-6. Fire, 93-1. 911 emergency, 93-2. Animal control, 94-5, and that's running counter to what we see across the state. Really seems to be quite a concern around animal control, and it splits depending on the area between domestic animal control and wildlife management. But 94-5 is among the highest that we have. Building inspection, and if you go back, you have a lot more people either experiencing it or through the grapevine having enough information to rate building inspection, and oftentimes when they have enough information through the grapevine to rate building inspection, that doesn't tip positively towards the city. 86-1 among the highest we have. Community planning, 85-7, and you can see from 12 years ago the negativity on community planning has been cut by 2/3. Stormwater and sewers, 94-5. Snow plowing, 89-10. Library, 89-4. Stormwater runoff, 92-5. If we continue, the pavement repair and patching, 83-17. That's going to be the highest unfavorable rating that the city has on city services this time around, but it's still an outstanding result. The norm right now across the state of Minnesota, and it always gets, you do a survey in February, March, April, and really is about the lowest, but it hasn't bounced back like it has many times across the years. The average on that is 60% favorable to 40% unfavorable. So you're less than half the expectation. Park maintenance, 98 to 2. Trail maintenance, 98 to 2. Recreation programs, 93 to 5. Park security, 89 to 2. Cemeteries, 93 to 2. Recycling, 96 to 2. Garbage collection, 97 to 3. Ambulance, 93 to 1. And sidewalk maintenance, we separated out from trails this time around, 94 to 6. If we do it aggregate and normalize it, take out the unsure and say, what's the mean rating? The average rating comes in at about 94.5%. It's among the highest that we have across the state over the last 3 years for city service ratings. Thus, when you ask the key question, when you consider the property taxes you pay and the city services you receive, how do you rate that value? 86% rate the value excellent or good, only 12% only fair or poor. And keeping in mind that you had 16% off the top of their head say high property taxes is the most serious concern, you can see that even if there is a concern on taxes, when they consider the value being provided, they see that that value is a net positive in their minds. Empowerment. This is the highest that we have over the last 18 months. 81% of people in the city think that they could have a say about the way the city's run other than voting. Norm on this right now is 60% yes, 30% no. So you're a third of the norm. Whatever you're doing with engagement in the community and giving people a voice has been felt. Just very strong rating. Knowledge of the work of the mayor and city council, 51% indicated they knew either a great deal or fair amount, about 7 points higher than the norm across the state right now. Norm's about 44%. The job performance rating, 66% positive to 11% disapproval. We always look at the ratio on this because the uncertainty varies so much. You'll have a community that has 4% unsure. Some communities have 40% unsure. 6 to 1 would place you among the top quartile in the state as we do the comparisons with the ratio we're looking at. Very strong rating for the mayor and city council. City staff, 52% indicated they've either had some or quite a lot of firsthand contact. That's about, the norm on that is about 45%, so a little bit higher, more contact. But the rating of the staff, now we have very little uncertainty on the staff, and this is asked of everybody. 86% excellent or good, 10% only fair or poor. You have almost a 9-to-1 ratio, positive to negative. That would place the city staff in the database over the last 3 years in the top 10%. Very strong ratings on the governance and the administration part of the city in the minds of residents. I'm going to read this question because I really couldn't capture it very well in the title. How important do you think it is for Red Wing to work to become more sustainable? This community is definitely green. 90% indicate it's at least somewhat important, and almost a flat majority, 45%, say it's very important for the community to work to be that. Very strong mandate in policy making for sustainability. Now, should the city encourage residential and business use of renewable energy? Absolutely. 92% agree with that, only 2% disagree. Parks and trails, 93% overall given a positive evaluation of parks and trails. 6% only fair, nobody said poor this time around. And on parks and trails, what different, I mean, some cities have what's in the minds of residents, a lack thereof, or poorly maintained. And so the excellent rating norm on the overall evaluation of the system is about 18% excellent. So you're more than double the amount of folks saying that the parks and trails are excellent in the community. Very strong rating for the system. Public safety. I talked about this a little bit up front when we looked at the most serious issue facing the community. And I don't know if this is a perception question or a reality question, but by about a 3-to-1 margin, 23% thought crime during the past 2 years had increased, 8% thought it decreased, and 63% had remained about the same. So amongst those having an opinion on crime increasing or decreasing, it does tip more to the feeling that it is increasing. Do they feel safe walking alone at night in their neighborhood? Still absolutely yes, 10%. So it's not following from their concern what's happening in their neighborhood more to what's happening or what they're hearing happening in the city, with only 10% indicating that they would not feel safe walking alone at night. And have they been a victim of a crime during the past year? 14% indicated that they had. We asked this question, and this one truly depends on demographics and where we're asking the question. I've had it as low as 2%. I've had it as low as high as 33%. So the 14% overall, it's very hard to give that comparative for you. In light of national conversations, a lot of cities have asked us to put in a series of descriptions of the police department and see what residents think of their own police department. And following the trend that we see since we started asking this 2 years ago, folks are very happy with their police department in the city of Red Wing. We asked them, first off, tell me if these statements are very accurate, somewhat accurate, not too accurate, or not at all accurate. I've combined the not too and not at all accurate into the red and pulled out the intensity, the very accurate statement. And you can see you have flat majorities on 4 out of the 5 saying that the professional very accurately describes the police department, trustworthy, respectful, and has a positive impact on the community. All of them approaching 60%. The only one that drops below 50% is 48% saying fair and consistent. 38% though indicated somewhat accurate, and that's your highest amount of folks saying not accurate. Some side comments indicated perhaps there was a traffic violation that they had or a family member had that was perhaps, shall we say, tainting their perception of being the police being fair and consistent. But still, when you have almost 90% on all of these categories, people feel very good about the work being done by your police department. Body cameras, your folks really take positions, and they take them very strongly. 95%. There's no gray on this question in the city of Red Wing. 95% approve of the use of body cameras, 3% disapprove. And I'll just point out, just to be consistent, if you look at the intents position, it's 40-to-1 in favor of approval to disapproval on intensity on this issue.
How does that compare to other communities?
We've always had, typically the norm on that, over the past 18 months, I think as you've seen more use of body cameras, most communities are at the 75 to 80% level. It's going to depend with questions that have come out of Minneapolis on, okay, you have them, but then how are you using them? More refining of the policy in some communities, but residents overwhelmingly favor, but we haven't had 95% indicate. I don't think I've ever had 95% agree on any policy, whether it's police or what have you. an interesting topic that Brian helped educate me on.
This one.
Because it was suggested in the draft. He said, you need to put questions on Barn Bluff, and I had no idea. You do, and once again, when I talked with Brian, I wondered, is this going to be a statistician's nightmare, a third, no set policy? But your folks do tip, definitely lean one way, shall we say. 26% strongly view that it should never be allowed, 23% somewhat view that it should never be allowed, almost a majority, 49%. 18% point to some restrictions, 23% indicate that there should be no restrictions whatsoever. And if we combine this and look at complete restriction or some restrictions, it's about a 3-to-1 split out there in the community that there should be restrictions versus no restrictions whatsoever. Yes, sir?
Are you talking about painting?
Yes.
Painting
Yeah.
apart? Okay.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. We wrote a paragraph and then asked about the exact question. Over the last 2 years, there have been discussions in Red Wing over people climbing Barn Bluff and painting the large rock face visible from downtown. Which of the following statements best represents your opinion? Painting on Barn Bluff should never be allowed. Painting on Barn Bluff should be allowed with some restrictions, or painting on Barn Bluff should be allowed without any restrictions. If they said some restrictions, we followed up and asked what would those restrictions be. And basically it revolved around, half of those folks had no offensive language. Some mentioned no hate messages. It should be educational, informative, those sorts of aspects of it. But then we followed up on this. How important is it to you for the city to control the painting of Barn Bluff? 60% indicated it was at least somewhat important, 37% not at all. The very important, those that said the very important, the 34%, were much more likely to say that the city should allow no painting on Barn Bluff. Those that favored some restriction or no restrictions whatsoever, it wasn't as important as an issue as other residents in the community. Okay. And then finally, communication. It's been quite a change over 4 years on where folks are getting their information. 4 years ago when I was here, the local newspaper was the dominant by far. Almost a flat majority indicated their primary source was a local newspaper. It's now tied for second, but it's down a third to 16%. The website has doubled to 30%. Cable TV is up 5 points. Direct mail's up 6 points. But social media at 15% is the highest we have across the state as a primary source of information. Normally, the norm on that is about 4%. So whatever is being done on social media has had an impact, and you can see, folks, there's definitely a tilt in the community. They're getting it electronically, whether it's website or social media. Even word of mouth is down to 6% in this community, which I think I look back in the 90s, and I think word of mouth was about 25% as a primary source of information. So the primary source of information is electronic. Now, how would they prefer to receive information? We follow up with this question just to make sure it's matching how people would prefer to get it, and they do prefer electronic. You can see the website, 22%. Social media, 15%, almost a one-for-one match on social media. They're getting it that way. That's how they prefer it. City newsletters and mailings, down a little bit to 27%. You can see the local newspaper has followed it as a primary source. Only 10% would prefer to get their information this way. So folks really are getting and consuming information the way they would want to consume information from the city. I believe that's the last chart. I would be happy to answer any other questions you might have.